Good morning. Warm regards from Baltimore to everyone, the organizers of the conference, the panel's chair, and my co-panelists. I'm sorry for not being there in person because of persisting visa problems. In this talk, I take 3 steps in reflecting on the key concept of sovereignty in modern politics and conclude with a fourth half step, which I hope will take us back to the home key. I start with 2 quotes from 2 documents centuries apart. First, from the 1848 French Constitution, Article 1. The sovereignty resides in the universality of French citizens. It is inalienable and imprescriptible. No individual, no faction of the people can attribute to itself the exercise of sovereignty. The second is from a 1579 British homily by Robert Filmer in defense of monarchy. Where every man is his own monarch or governor, the body politic will crumble away into the atoms of monarchy, which is the next degree to anarchy. A true representation of the people to be made is as impossible as for the whole people to govern. So I guess the operative terms here are the atoms of monarchy. And Filmer is saying that the 1848 kind of representation, as we saw in the Constitution's article, is impossible. So we have 2 models for body politic. These two, 1848 and 1576, clearly show the problem facing modern politics, how to create unity and peace out of the multiplicity. One, the late 16th century model, takes for granted the source of authority and infer the parts from it, while the other appears to rely on the parts to make up the unified whole, the source of ultimate authority. That is the mid-19th century model. At issue here is politics itself and its possibility. To elucidate this point, I turn to Jean Bodin. Bodin is credited with being the first to formulate the idea of sovereignty in the sense we know today, as a solution to the conflicts of religious wars in Europe, long before they ended. I take up only 2 basic formulations in his major work, 6 books on the Republic. The first formulation is about the very concept of republic, with which the book opens. Republic is the rightful government of many households and of what they have in common with sovereign power. The second formulation deals with sovereignty. Sovereignty is the absolute and perpetual power of a republic, which the Latins call Majestas, or Majesty. Note the key terms in 2 definitions: government, sovereignty as the absolute and perpetual power, but also many, as in many households in the first definition, and a republic in the second definition. I'll start with the absolute character of sovereignty, and then we'll get a better sense of these 2 sides, many and one. Sovereignty, S, is absolute. That is, it is abstract to the highest degree. But in what sense? It is absolute because it is separated, absolved from any relation, any binding. To understand this point, we need to compare it with the medieval concept of sovereignty. And here I rely on Dieter Grimm's reflections. Before the 16th century, many individual powers coexisted in segmented territories in Europe, according to Grimm. So sovereigns were concrete, they were relational to each other. The concept used to be a plural one, and only later became a unified one. There were barons, courts, municipalities, and so on and so forth. So we have in this figure different realms of sovereign powers with concrete individual instruments of power or governance. And their source of legitimacy is basically a relation to God or theological foundations. And that's how they, in a sense, justify themselves, these little circles. Of course, conflicts could arise among them, and it was impossible to resolve them by resorting to God or religious dogmas. Bodin's sovereignty should be understood as a solution to this very problem. It was a way of achieving unity beyond religious commitments. Therefore, it was, in a modern sort of Machiavellian sense of the word, political. S for Bodin was expanded legal power assigned to one ruler who has scattered sovereign rights in his hands, according to Grimm. Also, it's freed from the church, this complete possession of governing authority it is, not in relation to other sources of power. So S became secular. So sovereignty is all about the unity of political authority for Bodin, or a detour to politics in modern sense, away from religion, at least formally. Now the question is, does the unity of sovereign authority require unity of the sovereign too? So a sovereign can be a monarch, which Bodin preferred, or can be magistrates, can be a group of the wise white men, can be a council of workers. But we should remember that the unity of sovereignty remained an abstract concept. All these little forms, various forms, could be forms of government and not necessarily a new conception of sovereignty. As for forms of government, the many persist within the concept of one sovereignty. And it's noteworthy how the French word plusieurs keeps returning in political theories from Bodin to the 1848 Constitution in the article that we read. So we have the first definition by Bodin, many households, or we can talk about many princes, or later on many citizens, as in the Constitution we read. So given this character of sovereignty as absolute and abstract and one, and the many forms of governance that can be accommodated within it, it seems that the very claim of S is the unity of the one and the many. But what happens to this claim since Bodin, especially when the concept of the many, the problem of the many, would take much more real dimension? In the history of modern political thought since Bodin, Hegel has this exceptional place because he was the first major philosopher who worked with the new discipline of political economy. For him, modern society was a society of individuals, persons who had infinitely different needs and interests and empirical purposes to follow. Early in his work in Vienna, he intended to come up with a system of needs, that is, finding a form of rationality in the way all these particular needs relate to one another. He would drop this later on, and in the Berlin phase, he would turn to the new concept of a state. So it is through the state that the modern society or bourgeois society, as a spectacle of extravagance and misery, with all these different needs and interests, could be organized and brought into harmony. To show the relation between the one and the many, the sovereignty and the republic society in Hegel, I use a diagram. So here the thick uneven line represents the civil or bourgeois society, which is the sphere of difference. There are many needs, interests, it is economically organized, managed, and then there is a more straight line which represents the political society in Hegel. So bourgeois individuals as citizens, as persons, participate in political society. So the same individuals who were pursuing their self-interest, economical self-interest, are now considered as persons equal formally before the law. for Hegel, everyone can participate in political society because every individual is at the same time a citoyen, a citizen, already born in that territory, of course. So all these lines represent the way different persons or different individuals become persons equal in rights and before the law. And finally, the relation between these two lines, between civil society and political society, is made possible by the state. It's through the state, by the mediation of the state, that each individual can participate or in political society and become person enjoying equal rights with other persons. Hegel's view of sovereignty widely corresponds to Bodin's. Both held on to the unity of an indivisible source of power, and the form that this took for them was a monarchy checked by laws. They differ in that political economy and human individual as person are central to Hegel's system of right. Bodin has a republic of households with common properties, public properties, whereas Hegel has a republic of persons with equal rights, to put it in simple terms. Now, unlike what we might think of him as the philosopher of totality and system, Hegel's conception of the many, of the multiplicity, of the specific particular, deeply distinguishes him from Bodin and almost all other political philosophers since Bodin. But the oneness of the state, the abstract absolute sovereignty, appears to preserve its mystified or mystical character in him too. Here, Marx comes into picture. So the young Marx criticizes Hegel, modifies his position in a very philosophical manner. So it's not yet about a sociological, historical, economical take on politics, but simply through concepts. Marx writes, the predicate, the essence, never exhausts the spheres of its existence in a single one, but in many ones. For example, the sky is blue. Blueness does not belong only to a sky, but to many other objects. Instead of this, Hegel concludes, the personality of the state is actual only as one person, the monarch. Thus, because subjectivity is actual only as subject, and the subject actual only as one, the personality of the state is actual only as one person. A beautiful conclusion. Hegel could just as well conclude that because the individual man is one, the human species is only a single man. So this is a philosophical concept, critic, in fact. It's a logical one that the existence of a predicate is dependent on the existence of not just one subject, but many subjects. He further writes, Hegel's sentence about the personality of the monarch says nothing more than that sovereignty, the ideality of the state as person, as subject, exists evidently as many persons, many subjects, since no single person absorbs in himself the sphere of personality, nor any single subject the sphere of subjectivity. So this clearly opens up the way, the path for conceiving of society as a combination of many forces working together or against one another, and then the unity of a sovereign territory or political body politic is not just the work or the some form of emanation from one single source of unity in the more idealist manner since Bodin. Now, what does Marx say about the relation of S and R, of sovereignty and republic, about the claim to a unity of the one and the many? And what does he not say about it? It seems that what Marx says about this relation is that both are not unities, or he puts into question the unity and absolute character of both the sovereignty and the republic. This early position by Marx that the Hegelian state is not one, but many, that is, a legion of many forces, this position itself already anticipates prefigures the later, I would say, capital analysis, because if there is no mystical, absolute oneness, then the question is, how is politics possible? How is this unity, territorial, ideological, otherwise possible, and what sustains it? So how to conceive of these multiple forces at work in bourgeois society? But does Marx really free himself and political thought of the idea of the one, of unity in ruling? I tend to think that his mature capital project does return to this idea. Scholars today speak of the quote-unquote logic of capital, beyond the competition of many capitals and many forms of production. Is capital our new one, our Bodinian absolute sovereignty? If so, what is its politics? How about the politics of overthrowing this one, this unity? Does it have to take the form of that one itself? In answering the question in my title, I could say there has to be one, a Marxist majesty, if we are to grasp the history of the politics of bourgeois society since the late 16th century. But how it should look like in the future is another question. Will there be a politics in which neither the medieval scattered sovereignties rule nor any centralized, totalizing effort to tame production from the above? How does it look like? Thank you very much.